Alright, well, let's start off with the pragmatic view of truth. The formulator of this view of truth, his name was William James, and of this he said, "Truth is the expedient in the way of knowing." And essentially this means that a statement is known to be true if it brings the right results. But this view of truth must be understood in light of truth by correspondence, as the proponents of it want us to think of this view of truth as what corresponds to reality. Now, lies sometimes do work, but their effectiveness does not make them true. And this view of truth really, we do not operate in everyday life with this basic assumption of truth. Next up is the coherent view of truth. Now, what this view essentially postulates is that truth is what is internally consistent. But the statement "truth is that which coheres" is offered by the coherentist as a statement that corresponds to reality. To express itself, this view of truth depends upon the correspondence view of truth, just as you'll see some of the others do. Now, empty statements can cohere even though they are devoid of content. For instance, "all wives are married women" is internally consistent, but it is empty. It tells us nothing about the real world. The statement would be true by coherence even if there were no wives. Also, a set of false statements can be internally consistent. At best, coherence is a negative test of truth. Statements are wrong if they are inconsistent, but not necessarily true if they are consistent. Now we come to the intentionalist view of truth. This form states that truth is found in intentions, not necessarily in affirmations. A statement is true if the author intends it to be so. A proponent of the intentionalist view of truth has to use the correspondence view of truth to express his views, just as we noted before. Now, the statement "the intentionalist view of truth is true not because he intended to say it, but only if it corresponds to its referent. True in this sentence means correct or corresponds. Otherwise, it really doesn't make sense. Now, many statements are intended to be true, but sometimes they are mistaken and are false. If something is merely true because it is intended by an author to be so, then all sincere statements would be true, even the very absurd ones. But many sincere persons have been sincerely wrong. Now we come to the comprehensive view of truth, or the view that contains the most data is true, and those that are not as comprehensive are not true or are not as true. The claim, "the comprehensive view of truth is true," depends for its truth on the correspondence view of truth, just as the others. Comprehensiveness is at best only a test for truth, not the definition. The affirmations of that view must still correspond with alleged state of affairs in order to be true. A comprehensive view of error would be true, while a brief presentation of truth would be an error. One can have an exhaustive view that is false, and yet an incomplete one that is true. Next up is the existentialist view of truth. Now, a great proponent of this view in regards to religious experience was Søren Kierkegaard. He is a personal favorite author of mine, but that is something for another discussion. But he is not the only one responsible for this view. Other existentialist philosophers also held to it. And essentially what it is that what is relevant to our existence or life is true, and what is not relevant to our existence or life is false. A good quote on this would be from Martin Buber, and he stated, "Truth is found in persons, not in propositions." But the statement "truth is not found in propositions" is itself a propositional truth claim, meaning it's self-defeating. Now, the existentialist confuses the nature of truth and the application of truth. Of course, all applicable truth should be applied to one's life. That is, all objective truth should be appropriated subjectively where possible. But this does not mean truth itself is subjective. Existentialism presents too narrow a definition of all truth. Even if truth is existential in some sense, not all truth fits into this category. For instance, physical, mathematical, historical, and theoretical truths. If truth by its nature was found only in existential relevance, then none of these could be true. What is true will always be relevant, but not everything that is relevant is true. Truth about life will be relevant to one's life, but not everything relevant to one's life is itself true. And lastly, we come to the relativistic view of truth. This view can best be summarized by the recurrent statement, true for you, but not for me. Now, when someone claims that all truth is relative or subjective, they are making a correspondent truth claim. And so, relativistic truth is self-defeating, as it assumes what it denies, what you often hear someone say. They'll say, all truth is relative. But what you then must ask is that a relative truth? And so it reveals the contradictory nature of this view. I really find this view to be the worst one, because it's quite patently false, and it's really only used to avoid confrontation or just to avoid being labeled as an intolerant. Lastly, we finally get to what we've been defending, truth by correspondence, or the view that truth is what accurately describes its referent. Now, non-correspondence is self-defeating, as we have demonstrated. As we've seen, all non-correspondence views of truth imply a correspondence view of truth, in their very attempt to deny the correspondence view. For example, the claim that non-correspondence view is true implies the non-correspondence corresponds to reality. The non-correspondence view cannot even express itself without using the correspondence view. And also, lies become impossible without a correspondence view of truth or falsity. If a statement doesn't need to correspond to the facts to be true, then any factually incorrect statement could be true, and if this is the case, then lies become impossible, because any statement is compatible with any given state of affairs. Without the correspondence view of truth, there could be no such thing as truth or falsity. In order to know that something is true as opposed to knowing that something is false, there must be a real difference between things and the statements about the things. This real difference between thought and things is what is entailed in a correspondence view of truth. And lastly, factual communication would break down without a correspondence view of truth. Factual communication depends on informative statements, but informative statements must be factually true, that is, they must correspond to the facts in order to inform one correctly. Further, all communication seems to depend ultimately on something being literally or factually true, for we cannot know something, like a metaphor, is not literally true unless we understand what is literal. This being the case, it follows that all communication depends in the final analysis on a correspondence view of truth. It's all over, guys. Thank you for watching this video. I really had a pretty good time making it, and I'm going to make more in the future. Thanks.